If the release of the Epstein files wasn't already evidence enough of a Republican Party in disarray right now, lost in that news was the fact that a judge, who Donald Trump himself appointed, has overturned the gerrymandered maps that Texas Republicans passed in order to flip 5 seats in that state, meaning Texas will have to use its previous maps from 2021, and the ruling has led to quite a bit of chaos in the GOP. According to Punchbowl News, California GOP Representative Kiley tears into redistricting push after court struck down new Texas map. Quote, to the extent there was any point to begin with, which I don't think there was, I don't think even if you've got a partisan advantage on this, it in any way, shape, or form justifies it. But that's not even going to happen, it looks like. And with this court decision, it's even more in doubt. So it's just utterly foolish. Kiley also slammed Speaker Johnson, saying he should have publicly opposed redistricting and struck truce with Jeffries. Quote, it was a total failure of leadership to let this happen in any way that is going to be bad for our own members, bad for the House, bad for the representation across the country. Now, I have some thoughts here. On one hand, Kiley is absolutely correct. Think about what Republicans have managed to do here. They engage in a completely corrupt scheme to engineer themselves a permanent majority in the House. Democrats promise to retaliate if they do it. Republicans do it anyway, so Democrats respond, and now Republican scheme gets blocked in court, while California's, which has been unsuccessfully challenged by Republicans 5 times, still stands. There is a legal term that I like to use in instances like this: fuck around, find out. But on the other hand, let me remind you that Kevin Kiley was conspicuously silent only until the moment that he personally would be impacted by California's plan to neutralize Texas's power grab, thereby eliminating Kiley's district. He didn't say a word when Donald Trump issued his little clarion call to Greg Abbott in Texas to redraw that state's maps. That was apparently totally acceptable as far as Kiley was concerned. But once California emerged as a weapon to neutralize the Texas redraw, suddenly Kevin Kiley became a staunch opponent of gerrymanders. Isn't it so interesting how so many Republicans only manage to have their come-to-Jesus moment when they are personally impacted by something? And that's a point, by the way, that I brought up on CNN.
Jessica, do you support independent redistricting for every state, like a national bill that would do that?
I think redistricting by an independent commission allows it to be decided by the people. It allows politicians to be more accountable to the people that they are serving. And I think it also puts us in a position where we have more competitive races.
So is that a yes,
yes
nationwide?
Absolutely.
And you support something similar?
Absolutely. And in fact, I supported it when the Democrats put exactly that forward with the For the People Act in 2021. And do you remember how many Republicans voted for that bill? No. It was 0. Not a single Republican voted for independent redistricting commissions nationwide. And so I think it's interesting that you have all of these Republicans suddenly having their come-to-Jesus moment when it comes to independent redistricting commissions, only because it's happening in California. And yet there wasn't a single Republican, including Kevin Kiley, who we've heard from, who had come forward when Texas decided to redraw its maps. But suddenly when it's happening to them, when they get a taste of their own medicine, they cry foul. But to his credit, what Kiley said about Mike Johnson, that Johnson should have publicly opposed redistricting and struck a truce with Jeffries, he's right. And yet, is anyone surprised that Mike Johnson never pushed back on Trump? This is why he's in GOP leadership, because the sole qualification is that you are slavishly devoted and 100% servile to the president. That's it. Not that you can lead, not that you care about your constituents, not that you're competent. It's that when the president says jump, you say how high. And so when Trump decided to engineer his plan that would directly impact the House, Mike Johnson sat idly by and let it happen, and now we may very well be in a world where Johnson loses his speakership as the direct result of the Democrats' advantage in redistricting. Again, a war that they did not start. It's almost like blindly putting your fortunes in the hands of a guy who's presided over a country so poorly that his poll numbers are sinking in literally every category. Might not have been the wisest plan after all. Now, let's talk about this court decision for a moment, because I want to make sure that you have all the facts and that your expectations are measured, since the reality is that this decision, which again was authored by a judge who Trump appointed, has now been appealed up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So I spoke with Mark Elias, whose firm brought this winning case, and here's what he had to say.
We've talked about this before, that, I'm 4-0 in the Supreme Court. I've argued 4 cases and I've won 4 cases. All 4 of them were redistricting cases. All 4 of those cases took essentially this tact against the Republican gerrymanders that I was suing over, which is to say that they were impermissible racial gerrymanders in that the legislature used race too much. So in other words, it wasn't from the perspective of saying there should have been more use of race. Well, they weren't cases in which I was defending, for example, the use of race in Voting Rights Act cases. By the way, my law firm has defended successfully Voting Rights Act cases in the Supreme Court, and I wholeheartedly stand behind those cases and the continued vitality of the Voting Rights Act. But the argument, though, I made in those cases was essentially the Republicans were playing a cynical game in using race impermissibly. And that is evident in this case in Texas, right? I mean, remember how we get into the redrawing of this map. It is a letter sent by the Department of Justice, controlled by Donald Trump through Pam Bondi and Harmeet Dillon. They send a letter to the legislature saying, you have drawn racial gerrymandered districts. You created what are called coalition districts between black voters, white voters, and Hispanic voters in the creation of your 2021 map. Now, this was on the heels of a trial in which the legislator who drew the 2021 map said she never used race at all. She didn't use race at all in creating those districts. But what happened is this letter gets sent and Greg Abbott uses it as the justification for a new map that destroys these coalition districts. Well, if the original districts were not drawn using race, as the Republican state map drawer said in around the 2021 map, then the destruction of those districts using race was just a racial gerrymander, right? Yeah. Like literally you had naturally occurring districts in which black and white and Hispanic voters happened to be in the same district. And then based on Pam Bondi and Harmeet Dillon's handiwork, the state of Texas is told, separate those people, separate the black and the Hispanic and the white voters and put them into different districts. Well, that's just an impermissible racial gerrymander. So it's not a left of center jurisprudential argument. It is actually a right of center jurisprudential argument, which is not to use race. If you look at the opening line of this court's opinion, again, written by an appointee of Donald Trump, he begins by quoting the Chief Justice by saying, the way to stop discriminating based on race is to stop discriminating based on race, which comes from a opinion written by the Chief Justice in a redistricting context, which basically is a clever way of saying don't racially gerrymander. So, no guarantees what happens when this goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, no guarantees, where we go from here. But, this is a good example of the lawyers at my firm, and I give them all the credit here, okay? They deserve all the credit along with the lawyers for their plaintiffs and also our clients, who are 13 voters who are willing to put their names on a complaint to fight for the rights of all Texas voters. As this case goes forward, I have a lot of confidence that it will stand.
So look, I want to have some humility here and recognize that this thing still has to go in front of the Supreme Court. But as of this moment right now, in the aftermath of the Republican effort to engineer themselves a permanent majority in the House, all they've actually managed to do is incite an arms race that they're now losing. Kevin Kiley is right to be angry, even if he was too cowardly to say anything at the outset, and that's because he's led by weak leadership whose allegiance is not to his constituents or this country or democracy more broadly. His allegiance is to Donald Trump, who may think he's a master tactician, but who is in reality responsible for what we're now seeing is the collapse of the Republican Party in real time. Before you go, if you enjoyed this content and you want to see more and support independent media, please subscribe to this channel. The subscribe button will be right here on the screen. But second, the reality is that we are now in a political environment where this administration can lean on any of the social media platforms to suppress certain voices if they don't like critical coverage. That means my longevity here is in the hands of a few tech billionaires who are already making it clear that they are willing to cater to this administration. To that end, signing up for my newsletter is a way for me to reach you directly if that ever becomes necessary. I'll put the link right here on the screen as well, so please sign up. It's free, but there's also an option to do a paid subscription if you'd like to support me and my team. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching.